give that a moderate,
You got a TED Talk coming up?
2, 3, yeah.
Oh, that's right. You did tell me about that last
in May.
time. In May.
Donovan Penitentiary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty stuck. So what are you
Super
doing?
cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, what are you going to do? Well, so what kind of impact do you want to make for those inmates?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm still formulating, because with one of the main things with TED is it's ideas we're spreading, and it's really it's such a short focused time period. It's really about what's your one idea, what's your one point, but what I'm playing around right now is the I had a very, in a manner of speaking, privileged upbringing, right? I was upper middle class, I had good schools, great education, good supportive parents. Was a great athlete from very young, but got supported with opportunities to participate in baseball and soccer and then track and field. Got assistance from my family to go to a great college.
Wow.
And excelled in this thing in the hammer throw while pursuing education in engineering, right? And so then I'm working full time as an engineer and training for the Olympics. It was the Eagle Scout, like the clean cut, all American, golden boy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And adult Anglo-Saxon male, strong, good looking, big, tall, all that stuff.
Yeah.
All the advantages. And then when I had the emotional trauma that got triggered for me, and I had no preparation or references to deal with that.
Right.
And given the cultural conditioning of who I was, of the focal, specificity of what I had set out for myself and my goals, and the cultural kind of conditioning and perceptions of what's okay and not okay for men in terms of experiencing, let alone expressing their emotions,
Right.
let alone processing and dealing with that. Like, those just weren't conversations that I was in. Pretty significant personal development work, I had a lot of conscious tools and awareness, but I also had a very masculine, sort of approach and strategy, and key people in my life, like my head coach and teammates, and my engineering boss and other coworkers and associates. So when I went through what I went through, to the degree that I tried to express and share in that, I got met with a very masculine, tough it out, you can't let yourself, be weak and go into that. You have to be strong, just focus on work, stop making yourself so upset, all those kinds of things. And had myself painted into the corner, and I had the perception that if I went to get medical help, literally I thought, with what I was feeling and thinking, that I would end up locked away in restraints, pumped full of drugs the rest of my life. And being who I was and the warrior that I was like, there's no way I'm going to turn myself over, give up control into that kind of a fate. I literally would rather be dead than go through that. And then I ended up making that choice, that really bold, dramatic choice. After 2 months of not sleeping and having all the emotions going that I could, and not having any way to alleviate them or get out of them, and I dove down that flight of steps.
Wow.
And pretty significant personal development work. I had a lot of conscious tools and awareness, but I also had a very masculine, sort of approach and strategy, and key people in my life, like my head coach and teammates, and my engineering boss and other coworkers and associates. So when I went through what I went through, to the degree that I tried to express and share in that, I got met with a very masculine, tough it out, you can't let yourself, be weak and go into that. You have to be strong, just focus on work, stop making yourself so upset, all those kinds of things. And had myself painted into the corner, and I had the perception that if I went to get medical help, literally I thought, with what I was feeling and thinking, that I would end up locked away in restraints, pumped full of drugs the rest of my life. And being who I was and the warrior that I was like, there's no way I'm going to turn myself over, give up control into that kind of a fate. I literally would rather be dead than go through that. And then I ended up making that choice, that really bold, dramatic choice. After 2 months of not sleeping and having all the emotions going that I could, and not having any way to alleviate them or get out of them, and I dove down that flight of steps.
Wow.
Dramatic and amazing recovery, mainly by engaging the physical and mental, strengths that I had built over decades of training. And what I didn't even deal with really was the emotional component. I was really able to operate independent of or over the top of that stuff. And literally at the time, about 2 weeks into my recovery, I told my head coach at that time, who was pivotal and instrumental a week before that in really, challenging me and encouraging me to try to, recover when I kind of was on that, in between and devastated, right? And sort of in that point of like giving up and hopeless. And I mean, I already felt like I'd given up, right? I hit that point where I gave up and did what I did is, the way out. But, and so he kind of was actually confrontational and challenging me, like, are you going to give up and quit and fight and make yourself well? And I hated that conversation, but I'm like, well, given those choices, well, of course I'm going to fight and make myself well. No fucking idea how to do that, because then I start asking, well, who's recovered from this? And they're like, nobody. And then I'm like, okay, well then I'm going to be that guy. Like, I got to figure this out or just make it up, like invent it. And I did, and I walked out of the hospital 6 weeks later. And a lot of that was the nutrition strategies that I had, the mindset, the mental focus, the mental and visual training tools. But
making that decision.
This is almost the whole TED Talk in itself, right?
No, that's good though.
Well, I kind of expanded into the story partly. The performer in me. But the thought that and this is the challenge for me, is to condense and focus this, is that while I had all the, what you would consider, from a societal standpoint, certainly advantages in my upbringing and my genealogy, right? Like, and
you had training behind you.
But just literally the family and the race and the status, that I was brought into. My father was an engineer. My mom was a high school chemistry teacher. So we're like upper middle class. Contrasted with what I imagine the majority of these guys in prison have, were born into broken homes, drug abuse, gangs, violence, like really hardcore stuff from very, very early on. Maybe even, their mother was a drug addict, right? Like maybe they had that going on before they were even born, right? And certainly in that formative period, which they didn't have any choice. Like they were completely at the effect of their environment and the people that were around them. So given what they were brought up in, it's almost like they didn't have a choice either in the actions they were taking and the crimes that they were committing. And that would, at some point there was a pivotal action that led to them being put in prison, because of the so-called choices that they made. But how much free will or choice that they really have? And it's easy for us to sit in judgment of having the advantages and the upbringing and the rules, right, and the obedience, right, and the references for what's right and wrong and it's allowed and not allowed, what we would do, what we would never do. They've had a totally different set of conditioning. So who's to say if you put you or me in in a different ethnicity, in a different culture, in a different environment, through those set of experiences, that we wouldn't make the same or similar kinds of choices that would have us end up in a different place, right? And so there's that kind of contrast but parallel, and the edge that I think that there is that's really interesting, but for me to navigate is that well, how much choice do we really have? And then the biggest thing is like, okay, well, we did all the stuff that brought us to this point. And for me, there's been tremendous guilt and shame in my path. And literally, it's taking me 18 years to get to the point where I've been publicly, able and willing to share the suicide attempt component. Because in the past, for the better part of the last 18 years, I've never said the word accident, but I've never said that was a suicide attempt. You know, I'd say something somewhat ambiguous like I ended up going headfirst down a flight of steps, right?
Yep.
I broke my neck.
Yep.
You know, I wouldn't even talk about it. I wouldn't talk about an accident.
Right.
You know, and let people sort of fill in the blanks. And if ever anyone ever, you know, pressed me or, you know, asked me questions, I would deflect it, or I would usually say something like, well, I prefer to focus on, you know, the recovery, you know, than time doing what I could, emotional level work on my own and with limited private support, but not really feeling like anything was getting to the core or underlying things. And
so what shifted?
and now living also in this certain level of low grade fear. I mean, first there's the PTSD. Like I went through this major emotional trauma, and then this major life altering physical trauma, right? And all my dreams and all that stuff shattered. And then like the challenge of recovering from quadriplegia, which then I did like successfully and triumphantly, and yet I'm not to the 100%. I didn't make it back to the Olympic level. Like I tried making a comeback for 5 years, you know, in the 2000 and 2004. I was at least like thinking if I could get myself back to the Olympic trials, right? And, exactly. Like that's not enough of a victory, but for me, like, you know, before I was going for the gold medal, so there's always that.
You just want to be at the trial.
Part of what makes a champion is the focus on that gap, right? But I also went kind of overboard into that, where I was living so much in the not good enough and not standing enough on the top of and honoring and celebrating like how much I had accomplished, how far I had come, you know, how awesome it was to get to the level where I was who I am, what I've went through, the choices I've made, the good, bad, and the ugly, you know, and a level of recognition that I made the right choice. Like I actually made the right choice. In a manner of speaking, it was the only choice that I could make. But given, again, all those conditionings and everything that came together, it was the only choice that someone, like with my background, most about the Olympics, was the idea of being an inspiration.
Wow.
And so I thought, you know, I get on the podium and the gold medal and the national anthem and all these people are going to be inspired. And so, you know, when I look objectively at most about the Olympics was the idea of being an inspiration.
Wow.
And so I thought, you know, I get on the podium and the gold medal and the national anthem and all these people are going to be inspired. And so, you know, when I look objectively at possibility for inspiration, my life story is now. It's like so far beyond any gold medal that's ever been won in history.
Wow.
Right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
that, you know, it blows my mind. It kind of gives me chills, and it's like this is the journey and the path and the destiny, you know, whatever my soul's calling. You want to be an inspiration? Yeah, we're going to make you an inspiration, you know.
You can, because it was really comes all the way back to that decision when you're laying in that bed, whether you want to live or you want to die.
Yeah. And there's no way, you know, that I could have consciously planned, you know, what's unfolded. And so there's the choice now in that I could choose to live in, you know, the pain, the sorrow, the disappointment, the embarrassment, shame and guilt around what I did, that was a conscious and intentional choice, and that it, you know, had me go through what I went through. Or I could choose to honor myself and that was the right choice, you know, and have compassion for my own humanity in that.
Wow. The
challenge that I went through in that, and release the judgment of it being right or wrong or good and bad. It was like, well, that's what I did. And you can have a lot of opinions one way or the other, depending on which way you want to look at it. You could certainly make a point for like, well, that was a terrible mistake.
But how do you make that emotional connection?
Right.
It's that emotional connection to live. How did you make that one? Because you were going to live.
I don't know how I could say that. You know, it wasn't like I had absolute 100% emotional congruence that I'm going to live and I'm going to, you know, triumph over this, or, you know, I mean, what came out of my mouth is I'm going to recover 100% and walk out of here.
So that's the thought that you kept bringing forward.
But that was, yeah, I mean, that was a